Well, hey there, my delicious little insomniacs. Welcome back to the Scary Bedtime Stories Episode 2. I'm your host with the most, Chuck Duclaw, the furry menace who whispers nightmares so filthy sweet they'll make you blush in your sleep. Or maybe just give you a hard-on from fear. Who am I to judge? Tonight we've got 7 little tales of pure dread. No full moon bullshit required. Just enough creeping horror to lull you into dreamland. Or make you check under the bed for something hornier than a one-night stand gone wrong. Settle in, dim the lights, and try not to touch yourself while I read. Unless that's what you're into, and then by all means, go feral. But without further ado, let's begin, you naughty little bastards. Well, I hope you all are snuggled in tightly and ready for the stories to begin. Because, well, here we go. Story number 1 is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly, I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me an insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture. A pale blue eye with film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now this is the point where you probably fancy me mad, but madmen know nothing. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust my head in. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust my head in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was all in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at midnight, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black, as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, oh so steadily. I had my head in and was about to open with the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down either. He was still sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and then I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepened with its dreadful echo the terrors that distract me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since that first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a moose crossing the floor. It's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with all of these, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim, and it was mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily I opened it, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say, there came to my ears a lull, dull, quick sound such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steady I could maintain the ray upon his eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder, every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well that I have told you I am nervous? So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart might burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound that would only be described as light. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it finally ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was definitely stone dead. His eyes would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse, cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot. I'd been too wary for that. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock and still dark as midnight outside. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what did I have to fear now? 3 men entered who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor, and during the night a suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been logged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been dispatched to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. Well, the officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them, and I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became even more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I had now grown very pale, but I talked more fluently with a heightened voice, yet the sound, it increased. And what could I do? It was low, dull, quick-sounding, much a sound as a watch makes when enveloped with cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise, it just steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury about the observations of the men. But the noise, it just steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise, it arose over all and continuously increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder. "Villains, villains," I shrieked. "Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It's the beating of his hideous heart that plagues me." Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed The Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe. And if you would like to hear more from Edgar Allan Poe, one of his more famous tales is that of the Raven. I can highly recommend you going and checking that one out as well. I hope that this one helped you to at least, at a minimum, get a little bit drowsy and ready to nod off into slumberland. But if not, we've got another story coming up shortly. Well, I hope your eyes are getting heavy by now, or possibly you've already nodded off to sleep, but if not, maybe the next story will be the one to seal the deal. Our next tale comes from W.F. Harvey and is titled August Heat. It is impossible to describe just what I felt as I realized that the drawing was indeed a portrait of myself. For in one sense, it was not a likeness at all. It was far more than that. It was not merely some resemblance that might have been accidental. It was the very image of myself as I had appeared to myself in the mirror that morning. The man who had drawn it had caught a very expression of my face at the moment when I had been thinking about the dreadful heat. I turned the sketch over. On the back was written in pencil, James Clarence Withencroft, August 20th, 1909. It was the date of that very day. I staggered back to the armchair and sat down. My legs trembled under me. The heat was overpowering. The room swam before my eyes. I tried to think, but my brain refused to act. I must have sat there for some time in a kind of stupor. Then I became aware that the artist had risen from his seat and was standing beside me. "Are you ill?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said, "but this is very strange." I held out the sketch for him to see. He looked at it, then he looked at me. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is strange." I drew it without thinking. I did not know what I was drawing until I was finished. He paused for a second. "I've been drawing all day," he went on. "I have drawn nothing but that face, your face. I could not help it. The heat has been too much for me." He passed his hand across his forehead. "I think I must be going mad," he said. I rose to my feet. "I must go," I said. "I have an appointment." He did not try to detain me. I went out into the street. The heat was still intense. The sun was setting, but the air was like that of an oven. I walked on aimlessly. My head was in a whirl. Presently I found myself outside the gates of a cemetery. I went in. It was cooler there than under the trees. I wandered about among the graves, and suddenly I came upon a newly dug one. A headstone lay beside it, ready to be placed in position. I looked at the inscription. It read, "Sacred to the memory of James Clarence Withencroft. Born, died, August 20th, 1909. I stood there for a minute, staring at it, stupidly. Then I heard the footsteps behind me. I turned, and the artist was coming towards me. He was carrying a heavy mallet in his hand. He smiled a wicked smile at me. "I thought I should find you here," he said. And then all I remember after that is the darkness engulfing me. Well, that last story definitely made my eyes get a little heavy, but if it didn't work the same for you, maybe the next one will do the trick. Our next story is by Shirley Jackson. It's titled The Lottery. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square, between the post office and the bank, around 10 o'clock. In some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took all day, but in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours. so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow villagers to get home for lunch. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talks were still of the classroom and the teacher, or of the books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounced his name Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys and the tiny children rolling in the dust, or the ones that clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together away from the pile of stones, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather and laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women standing by their husbands began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing back, to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teen club, the Halloween program, all by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business. And people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was pretty much a scold. When he arrived in the square carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers. He waved and called, "Morning, folks," he said cheerfully. "Pretty hot for this time of year, isn't it?" "Seems like we're in for a hot one," someone answered. Mr. Summers set the box down on the stool and glanced at the villagers. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town. Mr. Summers spoke often to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was always talk of making a new box, but no one ever quite went through with it. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along the side to show the original wood color, and in some places the wood showed through completely. Mr. Summers set his carefully folded list of names on top of the box, then shook it vigorously. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool. Mr. Summers said, "Well, guess we better get this started and get it over with so we can all go back to work. Anybody not here?" "Dunbar," several people said. "Dunbar, Dunbar." Mr. Summers consulted his list. "Clyde Dunbar. That's right, he broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him?" "Me," a woman said. "He's my husband. I draw for my husband." "Right," Mr. Summers said. "Jack, are you representing your family?" A boy in the front nodded. "Here," he said. "Well then," Mr. Summers said, "guess we can get on with it then." The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Most of it they could recite themselves. Mr. Summers ran his hand over the box, then set the folded slips of paper inside. He stirred them around with his hand, then drew out one and unfolded it. "Harry Graves," he said. "It's your slip, Harry." A man came forward and took the paper from Mr. Summers' hand. "Bill Hutchinson," Mr. Summers said next. Bill Hutchinson came forward and took his slip. "Tessie Hutchinson," Mr. Summers called. Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, smoothing her apron as she went. "Clean forgot what day it was," she said to Miss Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed about it softly. "Thought my old man was out back stacking wood," and Miss Hutchinson went on, "and I looked out the window, noticed the kids were gone, and I remembered it was the 27th, and boy, I came a-running." "She's late," somebody said in the back of the crowd. "You wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe?" Miss Hutchinson said to her husband. Bill Hutchinson grinned. "Here she comes now," he said. "Get on up there, Tessie," somebody said in the crowd. Miss Hutchinson came forward and took her place in the front of the crowd next to her husband. All ready? Mr. Summers asked. All set, somebody said. Now, I'll read the names, Mr. Summers said, and when I call your name, come up and take your paper. Keep the paper folded in your hand until everyone has had a turn. Clear? The people had done it so many times that they only half listened. Mr. Summers began calling the names alphabetically. Adams, he said. A man came forward, took his slip, and went back to stand with his family. Allen, Mr. Summers said. Anderson. The names went on, slowly and methodically. Eventually, Mr. Summers said, Hutchinson. Bill Hutchinson unfolded his slip of paper. It was blank. Tessie Hutchinson said quickly, I think we ought to start over. That's not fair. Oh, be a good sport, Tessie, Miss Delacroix called. All of us took the same chance, another voice said. Shut up, Tessie, Bill Hutchinson said. Next family, Mr. Summers said. Jones. The drawing continued until every family had drawn. Now, Mr. Summers said, we'll open the slips. Bill, you open yours first. Bill Hutchinson opened his slip, and it was blank. Zanini, Mr. Summers said. The slips were opened one by one. Most were blank. Then Steve Hutchinson opened his and showed the black spot. No, Tessie Hutchinson shouted. It wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. Be a good sport, Tessie, somebody said again. Shut up, Tessie, Bill said. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said. Let's finish quickly. The villagers moved in on Tessie Hutchinson. It isn't fair. It isn't right. Miss Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. I guess I should have done this with the Edgar Allan Poe one that we did first, but I figured for some context I would let you know what was going on here in case you didn't quite follow it all. But basically they were taking lottery of each individual family in the town to see who would be stoned to death, and they do this annually every year. That's why the kids were gathering stones in the beginning, and that's why Tessie went into a tizzy the moment she seen that one of her family members had a black spot on the paper. So, horrible story, horrible thing, Salem witch trials, all the old weird stories that come from back in the early 18 and 1900s. But, at the end of the day, if you're put into that position, the only thing you can really do is hope to hell you don't draw the black dot. Well, that last story definitely gave us a new definition of getting stoned. Sorry, I had to do that. It was just, I couldn't not do it. Anyway, our next story comes from W. Jacobs and is titled The Monkey's Paw. Without the night, it was cold and wet. But in the small parlor of Laburnam Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess, the former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. Hark at the wind, said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. I'm listening, said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. Check. I should hardly think that he'd come tonight, said the father, with his hand poised over the board. Mate, replied the son. That's the worst of living so far out, said Mr. White. With sudden and unlooked-for violence, all of it beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is definitely the worst. Pathway's a bog, and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people were thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses on the road are left, they think it doesn't matter. Never mind, dear, said his wife soothingly. Perhaps you'll win the next one. Mr. White looked up sharply just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin gray beard. There he is, said Herbert White as the gate banged loudly and heavy footsteps came towards the door. The old man rose with hospitable haste, and opening the door was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said tut-tut and coughed gently as her husband entered the room. followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. "Sergeant Major Morris," he said, introducing himself. The sergeant major shook hands and, taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter and he began to talk. The little family circled, regarding the eager interest his visitor from distant parts, as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes and doughty deeds, of wars and plagues and strange peoples. 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. When he went away, he was a slip of youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. He don't look to have taken much harm, said Miss White politely. I'd like to go to India myself, said the old man, just to look around a bit, you know. Better where you are, said Sergeant Major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook his head again. I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers, said the old man. What was it that you started to tell me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris? Nothing, said the soldier hastily. Leastways nothing worth hearing. Monkey's paw, said Mrs. White curiously. Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps, said the sergeant major offhandedly. His three listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His gracious host filled it for him. To look at it, said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket, it's just an ordinary little paw dried to a mummy. He took something out of his pocket and showed it to Mrs. White. She drew back with a grimace, but her son took it and examined it curiously. And what is there that's so special about it? Inquired Mr. White as he took it from his son. Having examined it, he placed it upon the table. It had a spell put on it by an old fakir, said the sergeant major. A very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so at their own peril. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it. His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. Well, why don't you have 3, sir? Said Herbert White cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that middle-aged is wont to regard presumptuous youth. I have, he said, quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. And did you really have 3 wishes granted? Asked Mrs. White. I did, said the sergeant major, as his glass tapped against his strong teeth. And has anybody else wished? Persisted the old lady. The first man had his 3 wishes, yes. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's kind of how I got the paw. His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. Well, if you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now then, Morris, so why do you keep it? The soldier shook his head. Fancy, I suppose, he said. I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them. And those who do think anything of it will want to try it first and pay me afterward. Well, if you could have another 3 wishes, said the old man, eyeing him keenly, would you have them? I don't know, said the other. I just don't know. He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. Better to let it burn, said the soldier solemnly. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible person. The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. How do you do it? He inquired. Well, you hold it up to your right hand and wish aloud, said the sergeant major, but I warn you that there will be consequences. Sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White as she rose and began to set the supper. Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Her husband drew the talisman from his pocket, and then all three burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. "Listen to me carefully. If you only knew what some men have wished for and got," he said half seriously, "you'd be sorry. The first man, for instance, wished for enough money to last him his life. He got it, and then found he could not enjoy it because, well, he was dying of old age. The second man wished to be the emperor of the world, and he got it too, but then found he was hated and feared by everyone. The third man, well, he wished for death, as I told you." The old man smiled, put the paw back in his pocket. "Well, I'll think about it," he said. The sergeant major rose to go. "Don't blame me," he said as he shook his hand. "You've been warned." In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic commonplaceness about the room which nothing could give, an air of the fantastic. The piano was open with a little sheet of music laying upon it. The breakfast things were on the table, the fire burned brightly, and the room was full of a scent of coffee. "I suppose all old soldiers are superstitious," said Miss White. Some are, some aren't," said her husband. "The sergeant major was a bit upset last night," said Herbert as he helped himself to bacon. "I shouldn't take it too seriously if I were you, Father." "Well, I don't suppose I shall," said Mr. White. "But it does make you think, doesn't it?" He put his hand in his pocket and felt the paw. It felt dry and mummified, like an ordinary piece of dried meat. "I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed," said Herbert as he went out to the door, "and something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains." His mother laughed. "It makes you so uneasy, Herbert," she said. "Give it to me and I'll wish." She held her hand out for the paw. "No," said her husband. "I'm going to wish for something sensible." He held up the paw, hesitated, and then said slowly, "I wish for 200 pounds. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and son ran toward him. "It moved," he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor. "As I wished, it twisted in my hand like a snake." "Well, I don't see the money," said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table, "and I bet I never shall." "It must have been your fancy, Father," said his wife gently, but the old man shook his head. "It moved," he said. They sat down by the fire again and waited. The minutes ticked by, but nothing happened. The next day passed much as the one before. In the huge new cemetery, some 2 miles distant, the old people buried their dead, came back to a house steeped in shadow and silence. It was a nice house, but it seemed to have grown larger and colder. The days passed into weeks and the weeks into months. The house seemed full of empty echoes. One night, about a week after the funeral, the old woman lay awake, thinking of her son. The house was very still. Suddenly she sat up in bed. "The paw!" she cried wildly. "The monkey's paw!" Her husband started in alarm. "Where? Where is it? What's the matter?" She came stumbling across the room toward him. "We only had one wish granted," she said. "Why didn't we think of it? Why didn't we wish him back to life?" The old man stared at her. "Are you mad?" he said. "Go and get it," she cried. "Go and get it and wish the boy alive again." "It's foolish and wicked," he faltered. Did you not wish him back?" she cried. "Are you afraid?" He went down the dark stairs, found the paw in the parlor, and brought it back. "What was the number of the house?" she asked. 7, he said. "Hold it up," she commanded. He raised the paw. "I wish my son alive again," he said. A horrible silence followed, but nothing happened. They waited. The candle flickered. And then a knock. They both startled. A knock at the outer door. "What's that?" cried the old woman. "Nothing," said her husband. "A rat, perhaps." But then another knock, and this one louder. "It's Herbert," she screamed. "It's Herbert. What are you waiting for? Open the door." "For God's sake, don't let it in," cried the old man, trembling. The knocking grew louder, insistent. The woman rushed to the door. The old man, in desperation, fumbling for the paw. "I wish," he said in a low voice, "I wish my son was at peace, back where he belongs." The knocking ceased instantly. The street door opened. A cold wind swept up the staircase. His wife ran out into the road. The street was empty. The old man sank trembling into his chair, the monkey's paw still clutched in his hand. And then the third wish had been used. Well, that story certainly gives a new meaning to the words, "Be careful what you wish for." Or, well, maybe those are the original meanings of that saying. I don't know. But if that one didn't put you down, I'm hoping that this next and final one will. Our next story is by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it's titled "The Yellow Wallpaper." It is very seldom that a mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, or hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I would proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be so cheaply? And why have stood so long unattended? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is the only reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing, and one's own husband, assures friends and relatives that there is, really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, well, what is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and absolutely forbidden to work until I'm well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe the congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it or else meet with heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, John says the very worst thing I can do is think about my condition. And I confess, it does always make me feel bad. So I'll let it alone and I'll talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for gardeners and people. There's a delicious garden. I never saw such a garden. Large and shady, full of box-bordered paths and lined with long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There were greenhouses too, but they're all broken now. There is one that commands the road, a lovely shaded winding road, and one that just looks off over the country. A lovely country too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights and not clearly then. It is dull enough to confuse the eye and following, but pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. The color, well, it's repellent. almost revolting, smoldering unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow-turning sunlight. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. Well, here comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. We've been here for 2 weeks, and I felt like writing before since the first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there's nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save lack of strength, maybe. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is, well, not serious. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me, so not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort, and here I am, a comparative burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able, to dress and entertain and order things. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby, and yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin known to man. This damn wallpaper is enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard-of contradictions. The color is hideous enough and unreliable enough and infuriating enough, but the pattern itself, well, that is just torturing. You think you've mastered it, but just as you get well underway and following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you. It's much like a bad dream. The outside pattern is a florid arabesque, reminding one of fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints and interminable strings and toadstools budding and sprouting in endless convulsions, why, that's really what it's like. That is, sometimes anyway. There's one mark peculiar about the paper, a thing nobody seemed to notice but myself, and that it is that it changes as the light changes. When the sun shoots in through the east window, I always watch for that first long, straight ray. It changes so quickly that I never quite believe it. That is why I watch it, always. By moonlight, the moon shines in all night. When there is a moon, I wouldn't know it, but it would be the same paper. At night, any kind of light, and twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and the worst of all, by moonlight, it just becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it is as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind that dim sub-pattern, but now I'm quite sure. It is definitely a woman. By daylight, she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling. Keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it's good for me, and to sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. It's a very bad habit, I'm convinced, for you see, I don't sleep. And that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell him that I'm awake. Oh no. The fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look to her. It strikes me occasionally, just as scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it's this damn paper. I've watched John when he did not know I was looking and come into the room suddenly on the most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny, too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room, and when I asked her in a very severe voice what she was doing with the paper, she turned around as if she had been caught stealing and looked quite angry. She then said that the paper stained everything it touched. She said that she found yellow smooches on all my clothes and John's, and she wished we would be more careful. Did that not sound innocent to you? But I know she was studying that pattern, and I am determined that nobody shall find it out but myself. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better, and I'm more quiet than I ever was. John is so pleased to see me improve, he laughed a little the other day and said I seem to be flourishing in spite of my damn wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now until I found it out. There's still a week more, and I think that should be enough. I'm feeling ever so much better. I don't sleep much at night, for it's so interesting to watch developments, but I sleep a good deal in the daytime. In the daytime, it is tiresome and perplexing. There are things in the paper which nobody knows but me, or probably ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shapes get clearer and clearer every day. It's always the same shape, only more numerous. It's like a woman stooping down and creeping behind the pattern. I don't really like it. I begin to wonder, I begin to think, I wish John would take me away from here. It's so hard to talk with John about my case because he's so wise and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around just as the sun does. I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in by one window or another. John was asleep and I hated to wake him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on the undulating wallpaper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern, just as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if the paper did move, and when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about by the moonlight. It makes you look all gone." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I really was not gaining here and that I wished he would just take me away. "Why, darling?" said he. "Our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I cannot see how to do it before. The repairs are not done at home, and I cannot possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in any danger, I could and would, but really there's nothing in the way of danger. The place is safe enough, and the windows are barred." I did not mention to him that there was another reason for wishing to go away, because the woman behind shakes the pattern and creeps the hell out of me, and I don't want anybody to get that woman out, but myself, that is. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I keep watch on that strange woman. It used to puzzle me why that this woman had to creep, but now I see that she has to creep in order to get out. I don't like to look out the windows even. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper as I did. But I'm securely fastened now by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out in the road there. I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is definitely hard. It is so pleasant to be out of this stupid wallpaper in this great room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in that long smooch around the wall, so I cannot be lost. Why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man, you can't open it. Oh, how he does call and knock. Now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John, dear, said I in the gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps, under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, open the door, my darling. I cannot, I said. The key is down by the front door under a plantain leaf. And then I said it again, several times, very gently and slowly, and said it so often that he had to go and see. And he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short of the door. What is the matter? He cried. For God's sakes, what are you doing? I kept on creeping, just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last, said I, in spite of you and Jane, and I've pulled my most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. Or maybe he didn't faint. Maybe he was permanently that way. Either way, I am free from that wallpaper. Well now, my furry friends, the last stone is set, the bells have stopped ringing, and the catacombs keep their silence, as they always have. If you heard something just now behind you, it's probably nothing. Thanks for joining me in the dark. Hit that like if your heart's still racing, and subscribe if you want more nights like this in the future. But until next time, my friends, stay loud, stay lewd, stay furry. I'll see you in the shadows during our next sweet dream.